A leaked audio recording from inside the White House has just surfaced. Staff members can be heard screaming that the president has completely lost control. And this isn't some anonymous tip or unverified rumor floating around social media. Multiple senior officials have confirmed the recording's authenticity. And what you're about to hear goes far beyond anything we've witnessed in modern American politics. When White House insiders break their silence with this level of alarm, you know something catastrophic is happening behind those closed doors. Hit that subscribe button right now because the information I'm about to share with you won't be found anywhere else. So, what exactly is on this recording that has Washington in absolute chaos? Sources who have heard the full audio describe a scene of complete pandemonium inside the West Wing. The recording, allegedly made on January 26th during an emergency staff meeting, captures senior advisors openly expressing fear about the president's mental state and decision-making capacity. You can hear multiple voices overlapping, some shouting, others pleading for someone to intervene. One voice, identified by 3 separate sources as the White House Chief of Staff, can be heard saying the situation has become untenable and that constitutional options need to be on the table. This is not hyperbole or partisan spin. These are the president's own hand-picked advisors expressing genuine terror about what's happening in real time. Here's what makes this absolutely unprecedented. White House staff don't leak audio recordings lightly. The person who released this recording did so knowing it would end their career and possibly expose them to criminal prosecution. That tells you everything about how serious they believe the situation has become. When someone risks federal charges to get information to the public, they're not doing it for political gain or personal revenge. They're doing it because they believe the American people have a right to know what's really happening inside the executive branch. And believe me, what's on that recording should alarm every single American, regardless of party affiliation. Let me paint the full picture of how we got here. Tensions inside the White House have been escalating for weeks, according to multiple reports from credible Washington journalists. It started back on January 12th when the president allegedly flew into a rage during a routine intelligence briefing. Sources present in the Situation Room that day told reporters that the president began shouting at the director of national intelligence, accusing career intelligence officers of deliberately providing false information to undermine his authority. The briefing, which normally lasts 30 to 45 minutes, was cut short after just 11 minutes when the president stormed out. 3 officials who witnessed the incident said they had never seen anything like it in decades of government service. Things deteriorated rapidly from there. On January 15th, the Secretary of Defense reportedly tried to resign after a heated confrontation with the president over military deployments. The resignation letter, which was leaked to the press 2 days later, contained language so strong that legal experts said it bordered on accusing the commander-in-chief of violating his constitutional oath. The letter specifically cited concerns about orders that appeared to prioritize personal political objectives over national security interests. The secretary ultimately withdrew the resignation after intervention from congressional leaders, but the damage was done. White House staffers began privately expressing concerns to trusted journalists that something was very wrong. Smash that like button if this is making sense so far. Here's where the situation takes a truly alarming turn. On January 23rd, a closed-door meeting was held in the cabinet room with the president's senior-most advisors. According to 2 officials who were present, the meeting was called specifically to address growing concerns about erratic behavior and increasingly dangerous decision-making. The vice president, the chief of staff, the White House counsel, and 3 cabinet secretaries attended. What happened in that meeting has only been shared in whispers, but sources say the conversation centered on whether the 25th Amendment needed to be invoked. That's the constitutional provision allowing the vice president and cabinet to remove a president who is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. Now let's be absolutely clear about what this means. Discussions about the 25th Amendment don't happen casually or frivolously. The fact that senior officials even raised this possibility tells you they believe the president's capacity to govern is genuinely compromised. And here's the kicker. According to sources familiar with that January 23rd meeting, the discussion wasn't theoretical or precautionary. It was an active debate about whether immediate action was necessary to protect national security and prevent catastrophic decisions. One cabinet secretary allegedly argued that waiting any longer would be irresponsible given recent incidents. Another expressed fear that invoking the 25th Amendment could trigger a constitutional crisis worse than the situation they were trying to address. Then came January 26th, the day of the leaked recording. The emergency staff meeting was called after the president allegedly issued an order so concerning that multiple senior officials refused to carry it out. The exact nature of that order remains classified, but 3 sources with knowledge of the situation described it as operationally dangerous and potentially illegal. When the White House counsel attempted to intervene and explain why the order couldn't be executed, the president reportedly became enraged. He accused his own legal counsel of insubordination and threatened to fire anyone who refused to follow his directives. That's when staffers began recording the chaos. Don't go anywhere. The most explosive part is coming next. The leaked audio recording captures what happened immediately after that confrontation. You can hear the chief of staff attempting to restore order while other voices talk over each other in obvious distress. Someone can be heard saying, "We cannot allow this to continue," while another voice warns about the risk to national security if immediate steps aren't taken. Then comes the moment that has sent shockwaves through Washington. A female voice, which multiple sources have identified as a senior National Security Council official, states clearly and urgently that the president is not capable of making rational decisions right now and that someone needs to invoke the 25th Amendment before it's too late. The recording goes silent for several seconds before another voice, believed to be the White House counsel, responds that invoking the 25th Amendment requires the vice president's cooperation and that obtaining that cooperation could take time they might not have. That's when you hear what sounds like someone breaking down crying in the background. Another voice tries to offer reassurance that they can manage the situation, but the panic in the room is unmistakable. The recording ends with the chief of staff saying they need to reconvene in 2 hours and that absolutely nothing discussed in this room can leave this building. Obviously, someone decided the American people needed to know what was really happening. Here's what should alarm everyone watching this video. This recording isn't coming from political opponents or partisan activists trying to damage the president. This is coming from inside the White House itself. These are the president's own staff members, people who were appointed to serve this administration, expressing genuine fear about what they're witnessing. When the people closest to the president start sounding alarm bells this loudly, we have to take it seriously. This isn't about policy disagreements or normal political tensions. This is about fundamental questions of presidential fitness and constitutional governance. Subscribe immediately if you haven't yet. This content doesn't exist anywhere else. Now let's talk about what legal experts are saying, because the implications are absolutely staggering. A former White House counsel who served under 3 different presidents told news networks that this recording represents the most serious threat to presidential continuity since Watergate. He explained that the 25th Amendment exists precisely for situations like this, where a president's capacity to govern comes into serious question. However, invoking it requires extraordinary political courage because it can be reversed if the president challenges the removal. Here's how the 25th Amendment actually works, because most Americans don't fully understand the process. Section 4 of the amendment allows the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to declare in writing that the president is unable to discharge his duties. That declaration goes to Congress, and the vice president immediately becomes acting president. However, the president can then submit his own declaration saying he is perfectly capable of serving. At that point, Congress has 21 days to vote on whether to permanently remove the president, requiring a 2/3 vote in both the House and Senate. If they don't reach that threshold, the president is restored to power. What makes the situation so volatile is that invoking the 25th Amendment could trigger a full-blown constitutional crisis. Imagine the president publicly fighting his own removal while the vice president serves as acting president. Imagine the political chaos as Congress debates whether to permanently remove a sitting president. Imagine the impact on national security as foreign adversaries watch America's executive branch tear itself apart. This is why senior officials are reportedly so terrified about what comes next. Every option on the table carries catastrophic risks. Drop a comment right now if you saw this coming. I read every single one. Here's what multiple sources inside the administration are saying privately. They believe the president's behavior has been deteriorating for months, but recent incidents have reached a point where they can no longer be managed quietly. One senior official told a Washington Post reporter that staff have been essentially running the government around the president, making sure his most dangerous impulses never get implemented. But that system of informal guardrails is breaking down. When the president directly orders something illegal or operationally reckless, staff can only delay or redirect for so long before they run out of options. This isn't the first time in American history that presidential fitness has been seriously questioned. Woodrow Wilson suffered a stroke in 1919 that left him severely incapacitated for the final 18 months of his presidency. His wife, Edith, essentially ran the executive branch, deciding which matters were important enough to bring to the president's attention. Congress and the public were largely kept in the dark about Wilson's true condition. That experience is actually what led to the creation of the 25th Amendment decades later, because the nation realized it had no clear constitutional mechanism for handling a president who was unable to govern. Ronald Reagan's cognitive decline in his second term has been the subject of extensive historical debate. Some of his advisors later admitted they had concerns about his mental sharpness, particularly after the 1987 Iran-Contra testimony, where Reagan seemed confused about basic facts. However, Reagan's cabinet never seriously considered the 25th Amendment because they believed the president was still capable of performing his duties with proper support. The situation we're facing now appears to be categorically different, according to those who have heard the leaked recording. And let's not forget the ongoing debates about presidential fitness during the previous administration. Critics raised concerns, supporters dismissed them as partisan attacks, and the issue became hopelessly politicized. What makes the current situation so different is that these concerns are coming from inside the administration itself. These are not opposition politicians looking for political ammunition. These are career professionals and political appointees who work directly with the president, expressing genuine alarm about what they're witnessing daily. Stay with me. What comes next will completely change how you view the situation. The political fallout from this leaked recording is already beginning. 3 Republican senators have privately told news outlets they are deeply troubled by the audio and are demanding a classified briefing from White House officials. One of those senators, who chairs an important oversight committee, said publicly that if the recording is authentic, Congress has a constitutional obligation to investigate. That's significant because Republicans breaking ranks signals that this controversy transcends normal partisan warfare. Democratic leaders are being more cautious, which is actually telling. They're not rushing to politicize this situation because they recognize how serious it is. The Senate Majority Leader released a statement saying that all Americans should be concerned about reports of chaos inside the White House and that Congress stands ready to fulfill its constitutional responsibilities. That measured response suggests Democrats understand that overplaying their hand could backfire if this turns into a partisan food fight rather than a legitimate constitutional crisis. Meanwhile, the vice president has remained completely silent. That silence is deafening. Normally, when a president faces criticism or controversy, the vice president is front and center defending the administration. The fact that the vice president has made no public statements and has reportedly canceled several scheduled appearances tells you everything. Sources close to the vice president's office say there are intense private discussions happening about constitutional responsibilities and political calculations. Translation: they're trying to figure out whether to invoke the 25th Amendment. Do me a favor and slam that like button because it genuinely helps this video reach more people. Here's what constitutional scholars are saying about the vice president's impossible position. If the vice president leads an effort to remove the president, it will be seen as a political coup by millions of Americans who support the current administration. The vice president would be branded a traitor and would face potential political annihilation. However, if the vice president does nothing and the president makes a catastrophically bad decision that harms national security or American lives, the vice president would bear partial responsibility for failing to act when there was still time. This is the nightmare scenario the framers of the Constitution tried to prevent, but couldn't fully anticipate. They created the 25th Amendment to handle situations where a president was clearly incapacitated, like being in a coma or suffering from obvious severe illness. But what happens when the president appears fine publicly, but is reportedly unstable behind closed doors? What happens when staff are terrified, but the president's supporters see nothing wrong? What happens when invoking the 25th Amendment could cause more damage than the problem it's meant to solve? Let's talk about the national security implications because they're absolutely chilling. Intelligence officials are watching this situation with extreme concern. Foreign adversaries always probe for weakness, and a White House in chaos is an invitation for aggressive actions. A former CIA director warned on national television that adversarial nations are undoubtedly watching this closely and may see an opportunity to test American resolve. When enemies believe American leadership is distracted or impaired, that's when dangerous miscalculations happen. That's when regional conflicts escalate. That's when American interests get challenged in ways that could spiral out of control. Military leaders are in an equally difficult position. They've taken an oath to obey the orders of the commander-in-chief, but they've also sworn to support and defend the Constitution. What happens when those two obligations come into conflict? What happens when the president issues an order that senior military officers believe is illegal or operationally reckless? Do they obey the order and risk catastrophic consequences, or do they refuse and risk a constitutional crisis over civilian control of the military? These are questions that should never have to be asked, but here we are. Don't go anywhere. The most critical information is still ahead. Let's examine what happens if this situation continues to deteriorate. If the vice president and cabinet do decide to invoke the 25th Amendment, the political explosion would be unlike anything we've seen in modern American history. The president's supporters would take to the streets claiming a deep state coup. Congressional Republicans would face impossible pressure from their base to restore the president regardless of the evidence. The legitimacy of the entire federal government would be called into question. On the other hand, if nothing is done and the president's behavior continues to worsen, we could face an even more dangerous scenario. Imagine a genuine national security emergency requiring immediate presidential decisions. Imagine a terrorist attack or military confrontation that demands clear leadership and steady judgment. If White House staff are already recording conversations and expressing alarm about the president's mental state, how can we have confidence that critical decisions would be made properly? How can we trust that American lives and national security wouldn't be endangered by impaired judgment? Here's what keeps former White House officials up at night. The American system of government depends on trust. We trust that the president will put national interests above personal concerns. We trust that the cabinet will be honest about presidential fitness. We trust that Congress will fulfill its oversight responsibilities. We trust that career professionals will speak up when something goes seriously wrong. When that trust breaks down, the entire system becomes vulnerable. And right now, that trust is being tested like never before. The leaked recording has created a situation where everyone is forced to pick a side. You either believe the White House staffers who are sounding the alarm, or you believe it's all a fabrication designed to undermine the president. You either think the 25th Amendment should be invoked, or you think it's a dangerous power grab. You either trust the institutions trying to address this crisis, or you see them as part of a conspiracy. There's no middle ground anymore. And that's what makes this so dangerous. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'm genuinely curious to see your perspective. But beyond the immediate political drama, this is really about whether our constitutional system can handle a crisis of this magnitude. The founders created checks and balances precisely because they knew that power corrupts and that no one person should have unchecked authority. The 25th Amendment exists because they understood that presidents are human beings who can become incapacitated. But they never imagined a scenario quite like this, where the president appears functional publicly, but is allegedly spiraling behind the scenes. If this blows your mind, hit that like button right now. Here's where we stand at this moment. A leaked audio recording has exposed chaos inside the White House at the highest levels. Senior officials can be heard discussing the 25th Amendment as a necessary intervention. The vice president is silent. Congressional leaders are demanding answers. Intelligence officials are warning about national security risks. Military leaders are caught between conflicting loyalties. And the American people are watching this constitutional crisis unfold in real time. The stakes could not be higher. If the system works as designed, responsible officials will take necessary action to protect the country regardless of political consequences. But if the system fails, if political calculations override constitutional responsibilities, we could face catastrophic results. This isn't about partisan politics anymore. This is about whether the most powerful office in the world has any meaningful constraints when things go wrong. More developments are breaking by the hour. Sources say additional recordings may exist. Congressional investigations are reportedly being planned. Legal experts are debating whether the leaked audio itself constitutes evidence of a constitutional crisis. White House staff are reportedly terrified about retaliation if they're identified as sources. And through it all, the president remains publicly defiant, dismissing concerns as fake news and political persecution. Before we go any further, smash that subscribe button so you never miss content like this. Here's the reality we're facing. The leaked White House recording has exposed something that can't be unexposed. You can't put this genie back in the bottle. Senior officials expressing fear about the president's mental state and openly discussing the 25th Amendment isn't something that just blows over. This is a defining moment that will determine whether our constitutional system can handle its greatest test. What happens in the next 48 to 72 hours could reshape American governance for generations. Will the vice president and cabinet find the courage to act if the situation demands it? Will Congress fulfill its oversight responsibilities regardless of political pressure? Will career professionals continue to speak out even at tremendous personal cost? Will the American people demand accountability from their elected leaders? These questions don't have easy answers, but they need to be asked. The evidence is overwhelming. The stakes are existential. The constitutional crisis is real. Staff members screaming that the president has lost it isn't normal. Cabinet officials discussing the 25th Amendment isn't normal. A vice president going silent during a major controversy isn't normal. White House insiders leaking audio recordings at the risk of federal prosecution isn't normal. When nothing is normal, everything is at risk. Keep watching this story because it's moving faster than anyone anticipated. More officials are reportedly coming forward with information. Legal challenges are being prepared. Political alliances are shifting in real time. And somewhere inside the White House, staff members are deciding whether to leak more evidence or hope that someone else takes action before it's too late. Pause for a second and hit that like button if you're finding value in this coverage. The leaked White House recording has confirmed what many suspected, but few dared to say publicly. The presidency is in crisis. The people closest to the president are terrified. The constitutional system is being tested beyond its limits, and every American needs to be paying attention because what happens next will determine the future of this country. This is not partisan spin or political theater. This is the most serious constitutional crisis since Watergate, possibly in American history. When White House staff risk everything to get the truth out, when senior officials openly discuss removing the president, when the vice president goes silent at the most critical moment, you know we've entered truly unprecedented territory. The recording is real. The crisis is real. The stakes have never been higher, and the time for action is running out.